Here we are again. Public interest before corporate interest YouTube presentation. Hopefully at the end of the presentation you'll consider joining public interest before corporate interests. You can download the application form from PIBCI.net. You can actually write to me at Post Office Box 20 Parkville 3052. You can leave a message on 0439 395 489. We'll send you out application forms. Currently we have 447 members on the federal electoral roll. We need another 103 members to apply for registration as a federal political party, as I expect the next federal election will be around February, March next year. We've only got a window of about 3 months to get the 103 members so we can apply for membership as a federal political party. So why bother? Now what I want to talk about today is what's a concept which people no longer talk about, is a mixed economy. What is an economy? Well, basically an economy is the interaction between everybody on the planet. That's what it is, the interaction, the economic activity, the activity which provides us with the goods and services which we require. Unfortunately, over the last 40 years, during the deregulation, that's removing laws which protect ordinary people and workers to benefit the corporate sector, privatisation, giving away public property to the private sector for a peppercorn rate, corporatisation, allowing 3 or 4 large corporations to dominate every aspect of our existence, and globalisation, removing barriers to trade and allowing the largest corporations to manipulate sovereign rights. So it's a simple concept. So in Australia over the last 40 years we've moved from a partially mixed economy to a fully privatised economy. Things are so ridiculous that we don't even have an organisation or a manufacturing capacity to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines publicly. We need to rely on a private corporation because the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory was privatised in 1996. So we had to give CSL $1 billion in order to guarantee the supply of vaccines for COVID-19. So what is capitalism? Capitalism is a simple concept, a very simple concept. It's been around since the time of the beginning of humanity, the very beginning. It's private investment for private profit. It's very simple. Private investment for private profit. Whether it's the private investment of an individual, a family, a business, a corporation, the mission statement is to create ever-increasing profits for that entity, irrespective of the human, social, environmental and national costs. That is the essence of capitalism. Private investment for private profit. If it means exploiting the natural environment, if it means exploiting people, well, so be it. Because obtaining profit is the key. Now, during the last 3 centuries, tens of millions of people have died around the globe to countering the manipulation of the economy and their lives by the private sector. Millions, possibly tens of millions, around the globe in the last 300 years. I mean, what was slavery? It was an economic issue. It's a very simple economic issue. You don't pay your labour, you use that labour in order to create a profit for you. Irrespective of whether it was a human being or not, didn't really matter, as long as that profit was generated. So that's what capitalism is all about. I mean, they'd be happy to sell you their grandmother if it gave them a quid. It's that simple. That's the underlying assumption. So our society today is basically a private-based economy. What that means is that governments at the local, state and federal level have abrogated their responsibility to look after the needs of their citizens and residents and have outsourced that responsibility to the private sector. Nothing highlights this than the fiasco surrounding the reaction to COVID-19 over the past 15 months. The fact that we have had to rely on private corporations to provide the service in order to contain COVID-19, and we had to rely on private corporations to create the vaccines to tackle COVID-19. It's extraordinary. And every feature of human endeavour in Australia, whether it's education, whether it's early education, whether it's tourism, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether it's gas, it's all privately owned and privately controlled. So what is a mixed economy, and why is a mixed economy a central plank of the public interest before corporate interest agenda? It's very simple. We need to create competition in society in order for different sections of the community to benefit, not just one section of the community, as we've seen over the last 40 years, or the investment class that are 8% of Australians who has income above their everyday needs, who use this country's investment-friendly laws like negative gearing, franking credits, in order to amass, profit at the expense of their fellow citizens. So this is the dilemma. How do we break? Well, one thing is we increase the public sector, not in terms of civil servant, but we increase the number of activities which are run by the public sector. Public health, public education, public infrastructure, public housing, and the list goes on and on. When you have a strong public sector, it can compete with the private sector. To give you an example, today we have 4 major banks and a few minor banks. Competition is almost non-existent between those banks because they all have the same philosophy. Private investment for private profit. Profits for their shareholders, profits for their investments. That's what it's about. You exploit your workers, you exploit your customers in order to increase that profit. If that means removing service, so be it. So we've got this dilemma. So if you've got a strong public sector, for example, if you've got a strong public housing sector, the ridiculous prices that we pay for houses today would almost disappear overnight, because people would not be reliant totally on the private sector to provide them with housing and affordable rental, secure accommodation. So that you increase the public sector. This increases competition in the economy. It means that although dividends to investors may decrease, the benefit to the general community, and let's remember that outside people's so-called superannuation contributions, most people don't invest in this country or anywhere around the world. They're not investors, they're either social security beneficiaries or workers. So we find that as the public sector increases, competition increases, prices decrease, services improve. Now there is a third link to the economy. Now many people are concerned about the bureaucratisation which occurs when the state owns essential infrastructure or provides essential services. There is another tier of the economy which has never really been developed in this country, despite many attempts to establish this sector of the community. And I'm talking about cooperatives and collectives. And the most important example of this in Australian history is how the agricultural sector set up cooperatives and collectives to guarantee an income to farmers, to guarantee that they wouldn't be pushed off the land. And unfortunately during the 1980s, at the height of the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation era, at the very height where almost 99.9% of the population supported policies to privatise public assets. Unfortunately, what occurred in the 1980s is that many of these mutual societies, many of these cooperatives and collectives, and some were very, very profitable, were demutualised. What that means in plain English, money was given to members of the cooperative and they sold their interests to the private sector. The Australian Mutual Provident Fund, AMP, was a mutual provident fund. It wasn't this corporation languishing because of the outrageous financial experiments it's been doing over the last 2 or 3 decades. The Dairy Corporation, that was a cooperative. The Wheat Board, that was cooperative. Sheep, cooperative. So the economy is not about benefiting sections of the community at the expense of other sections of the community. The economy is about benefiting each and every person in that economy, whether they are social security beneficiary, whether they're investors, whether they're working people. It's about creating a secure, safe environment people can live in, prosper in, and feel secure. In 2021, the single most important issue facing most Australians is insecurity. Insecurity in terms of the services they're able to access from government. Insecurity in terms of their work and the type of work they do. Insecurity as far as their education is concerned, and let's not forget that all tertiary education has now been privatised, and the list goes on and on. And when you've got an insecure population, you get what we get today. People running in all directions, believing all types of, conspiracy theories, trying to make sense of a world which is very difficult to make sense of because they have no control in that process. I mean, casting a ballot every 3 to 4 years isn't what you call democracy. It's what happens in between those ballots, which is important. So here we have today, in 2021, an economy which is dominated by the private sector that uses a philosophical and ideological basis based on private investment for private profit, which has no responsibility to the nation state, no responsibility to other people who are not shareholders of that corporation. It has no responsibility to the environment. It has no responsibility except to its members. Having an economy which is dominated by the private sector has thrown up. This means that we are faced with very important challenges in the 21st century. And we can do a number of things. We can ignore what's happening around us, begging and beseeching that everybody gives us a fair go, which is ludicrous. We can become click activists and spend all our time in the virtual world fighting virtual battles with virtual warriors about virtual issues while the real world passes us by. We can be thrown into the pits of despair thinking that all these issues that we face is because of our own personal failings. And I find it hard to understand how many Australians now believe that because they can't fit into the current model, current economic and social model, that somehow there is something wrong with them. And they need to get therapy, they need to be on antidepressants, they need to be on anti-anxiety agents, they need to see counsellors. It's just extraordinary the number of people in this country who find themselves in that position. So you can go down the treatment pathway if you wish. As I said, you can become a clicked activist and just ignore it all and, fight around your favourite conspiracy theory, whether the Martians have come down to Earth yesterday or the day before, whether God exists, and the list goes on and on. Or you can limit your activity to casting a ballot every 3 to 4 years, frightened by an agenda which is now in the hands of the corporate sector. Most political parties' agenda now reflect the same agenda as the corporate sector. It's all about privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation and deregulation. Even the Greens have gone down that path, embracing green capitalism as the solution to the climate emergency we now face. Now obviously green capitalism is not the solution. It is part of the way to dealing with the problem. It's not the solution. So most people have given up hope, most people aren't interested, most people are privatised in the things they do, They're more interested in what's happening around them, friends, their families, having a good time, not having an interest, leaving the running, in inverted commas, of the country to the experts, somebody else, and then standing on the sidelines, becoming number one, ichiban, cringing, carping, complaining consumers. Well, we're not cringing, carping, complaining consumers. Members of public interests before corporate interests are about changing the world. Not just the world, but about what's changing here in Australia today. As far as economic challenges are concerned, we know that these challenges need to be tackled by expanding this country's economy, by increasing the public sector intervention when critical and essential services are needed, and by increasing rapidly the number of collectives and cooperatives that are in existence to provide safe, secure employment for people. Now, nobody gets rich being a cooperative and a collective, but you can have a satisfying lifestyle and a satisfying job and provide goods and services to the rest of the community and go to bed at night and know that you've acted in a moral and ethical manner. But ultimately, whether these ideas go anywhere, apart from the few dozen people who watch public interest before corporate interest YouTube, ultimately depends on you. Are you a click activist? Are you somebody who says somebody should do something about that? Are you part of the gunner tribe? Are you somebody who thinks political activity should be limited to casting a ballot every 3 to 4 years? Or do you think it's time the political debate was changed? Do you think it's time that we didn't see the same people talk about the same things every day and never come up with any real solutions? I mean, one thing which highlights how ludicrous the situation is in this country, we have 13% of the population, 1 in 8, living below the poverty line, in the richest country on earth. Potentially the richest country on earth. We have private organisations, 1.3 million people are now employed by private charities to provide services which should be provided by government. Now, if you want to see an end to this, it's not going to change by you becoming a click activist and immersing yourself in the virtual world. It's not going to change by joining an old car club and spending all your time doing renovations to your home or to some vintage car you've got. It's not going to change by marching in the streets, by being involved in small demonstrations in the streets. Unless we have a mass movement created, they'll just ignore us. But it is time that a new political force was thrown into the fray. And that new political social force is public interest before corporate interests. If you're at a loss what to do, if you want to be part of change, I encourage you to join public interest before corporate interests. You can go to our website, look at our policies, PIBCI, PIBCI.net. If you like what you read, we're an inclusive party, then join. If you're not computer literate, and I don't know why you're watching this YouTube if you're not computer literate, maybe you're at a friend's house, you can always write to us for application forms at Post Office Box 20 Parkville 3052. That's Post Office Box 20 Parkville 3052. Or you can leave a message on 0439 395 489. My name's Jeff Toscano. I've been hosting this week's YouTube. What we do next week, I'm not sure what we're going to do, but I can assure you we'll still be in the country. We'll still be enjoying the bounty that this great land can provide for everybody, not just a very small minority in this country.